Hello, and welcome to part 2 of In the Shadow of the Titan, an Order of Whispers, a City of Secrets. Braavos may be the youngest of the free cities, but the city's history is as rich as the famed Iron Bank. To unlock the magic at the heart of Braavos, we must understand the people that founded the city, as well as their motivations. I promise, the origins of the Faceless Men and the story of the founding of Braavos are worth revisiting, with our third eye open. Whispers in the Dark. The Roots of the Faceless Men. The kindly man gives Arya her first lesson in faceless history, explaining, "Men may whisper of the faceless men of Braavos, but we are older than the secret city. We have flowered in Braavos among these northern fogs, but we first took root in Valeria, amongst the wretched slaves who toiled in the deep mines beneath the 14 flames that lit the freehold's nights of old." There is a ton to unpack in the kindly man's story, but before we dive into the historical details, a quick aside. There is really strong green seer imagery in this part of the tale. We associate both whispers and secrets with weirwoods, and words like flowering and took root deliberately evoke the image of the Faceless Men as a tree with roots that spread from Valeria to Braavos. This is a theme we will explore in more depth in the second essay in the series. Now, back to history. First, the Faceless Men predate Braavos. We'll come back to this later, but the Faceless Men more than likely played a role in the founding of the secret city. Second, like Braavos itself, the Faceless Men opposed slavery as well as the Valyrian Dragon Lords. Revolts were common among the mines, but few accomplished much. The Dragon Lords of the old freehold were strong in sorcery, and lesser men defied them at their peril. The first Faceless Man was one who did. He moved among the slaves and would hear them at their prayers. And as the story closes, we learn that although the Faceless Men gave the first gift to the most wretched of the slaves, the one who had prayed the most earnestly for release, ultimately, he would bring the gift to the masters as well. Ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum. The Dragon Lords burned in their minds with no one there to hear. Here I am laughing at my own bad joke. But others in the fandom have persuasively theorized that the Faceless Men helped cause the doom of Valeria, because the World Book posits that a wave of assassinations of the key fire mages, who kept the 14 flames in check, likely contributed to the doom. This theory stands on solid ground. But beyond a shadow of a doubt, the kindly man establishes that a group of powerful dragon lords and fire sorcerers were the Faceless Men's secret enemy number one. To oppose them effectively, the Faceless Men must have had more than whispers in the dark at their disposal. If this were a crime drama, here is where I would tell you that the Faceless Men had both a motive and an opportunity to learn about the magic of the Valyrians and use it against them. Bloody Moon Rising. The Founding of Braavos. Per Maester Yandel, fugitives from a large convoy of Valyrian slave ships founded Braavos, after they rose in bloody rebellion and sailed north to escape their masters. Here's the relevant part of the World Book. Braavosi histories claim that a group of slave women from the distant lands of Jogos Nye prophesied where they would find shelter. These women were priestesses, called moon singers, and to this day, the Temple of the Moon Singers is the greatest in Braavos. The basics of Yandel's account are confirmed in the main text. Vividly, the kindly man explains, "Braavos is the bastard child who ran away from home. We are a mongrel folk. the son of slaves and whores and thieves. Our forebears came from 100 lands to this place of refuge, to escape the dragon lords who had enslaved them. In short, a group of prophets called Moonsingers helped a bunch of slaves kill their masters and escape to a refuge across the sea. There is a ton going on in this story, so we'll sort it out piece by piece. First, we'll look at what we know about the Moonsingers, because their prophecy is central to the story of Braavos' founding. A magical night for a moon song. When I first heard Moonsinger, I immediately thought about how the children of the forest call themselves those who sing the song of the earth. Moonsinger vividly evokes the idea of otherworldly magic. And indeed, there is direct evidence that the Moonsingers have magical abilities, and also a strong suggestion that Moonsinger magic is tied to blood magic. Let's start with the historical context. Moonsingers are not a separate magical elder race comparable to the children. Instead, they are the all-female religious class of the Jogos Nhai who live in the far east of Essos on the other side of the Bones Mountains. Interestingly, like the Cregnomen of the Reach, who are thought to have interbred with the children of the forest, the Jogos Nhai are described as short in stature. So it is possible, but not at all proven, that there is some kind of magical bloodline, elder race interbreeding at play in their history. Much more directly, the text tells us Moonsingers have prophetic ability. Because prophecies and visions appear all over the books, the legend of the Moonsingers working prophetic magic seems pretty credible. We also know that present-day Braavos remembers the role the Moonsingers played in the city's founding. Denyo tells Arya, "The Moonsingers led us to this place of refuge, where the dragons of Valeria could not find us." Fittingly, their temple is still the largest in Braavos. And wow, the temple is full of icy moon imagery. A mighty mass of snow-white marble topped by a huge silver dome, whose milk glass windows showed all the phases of the moon. A pair of marble maidens flanked its gates, tall as the Sea Lords, supporting a crescent-shaped lintel. If you recall, when Arya uses her secret identities, she returns to the House of Black and White during the new moon phase, or when the moon is a black hole, to use Bran's terminology. To be perfectly upfront, we know nothing about what kind of magic is practiced in the Moonsinger Temple, so this next bit is a little bit speculative. But, in fantasy, magic often waxes and wanes with the phases of the moon. In the real world, the moon controls tidal patterns, which would hold significance for an island-dwelling people such as the Braavosi. Often, these kind of ties to natural elements are precisely how Martin describes magic. So, we could conclude something mystical, and probably cold, is connected to this snow-white temple. Mirri Maz, Moonsinger student? The first reference to a Moonsinger actually comes all the way back in A Game of Thrones, when Mirri Maz replies to Daenerys asking where she learned the healing arts. "When I was younger and more fair, I went in caravan to a shy by the shadow, to learn from their mages. Ships from many lands come to a shy, so I lingered long to study the healing ways of distant peoples. A Moonsinger of the Jogos Nhai gifted me with her birthing songs. A woman of your own riding people taught me the magics of grass, corn, and horse. And a maester from the Sunset Lands opened a body for me and showed me all the secrets that hide beneath the skin." To be sure, Mirri's blood magic spell in Dany's tent is a literal song. Martin describes it as like a funeral dirge, a high, undulating wailing that sent shivers down Dany's back, and wailing like nothing human. Naturally, for a series named A Song of Ice and Fire, song and magic are frequently related. You might be thinking something like, "Take off your tinfoil hat!" Mirri was not a moon singer, she just studied with them in Ashai along with a bunch of other people. To which I say, sure, but let's note that our first introduction to moon singers groups them with blood mages from Ashai, Marwyn the Mage, and a lady whose most famous line is, "Only death can pay for life." I agree, this is not proof of blood magic, but this is strong circumstantial evidence. No one's rebellion. So, what is the connection between the escape of the slaves, the moon singer's prophecy, and the Faceless Men? George has not left us a lot of concrete information to go on, but the options are limited. 1. The Faceless Men helped facilitate the original Bloody Rebellion on the slave ships, and came to Braavos with the original group of escaped slaves. 2. The Faceless Men somehow found the secret city afterwards, or only came to Braavos after either the unmasking or the doom. Or 3. The Faceless Men, or some proto-version of them, were already in Braavos when the escaped slaves arrived. I'm not sure that it ultimately matters which of these is true, but I lean strongly towards option 1, with option 3 as a distant second. Because we have absolutely no information about this portion of the sequence of events, all we can do is speculate on the possibilities. Nevertheless, it is important to consider how the relationship between the Faceless Men and the Braavosi began. As for option 1, the present story strongly suggests that much of the power of the Faceless Men rests in their ability to control shipping and trade. Take, for example, Arya's first gift-giving assignment. She kills a shipping insurance salesman who was facilitating the trade of slaves. So it seems thematically consistent that the Faceless Men's journey to Braavos began by killing slave masters on their own ships. If this is the case, it implies that from the very beginning, the founders of Braavos owed something to the Faceless Men. Now, it's also possible that the slave rising just happened, and that the Faceless Men had nothing to do with it. But that would mean the Faceless Men were either coincidentally on the slave ships, or that they came to Braavos afterwards. And to me at least, neither of those options make very much sense story-wise. My guess is that the Faceless Men somehow worked with the Moonsingers to orchestrate the rebellion and lead their new people to safety. As for option 3, it seems like a long shot to me. To spitball, the World Book tells us that the Iron Bank was built on an abandoned iron mine. But what if it wasn't abandoned, and there was already another religious order hiding out there, like, say, the Lorathi followers of Bawash, the blind god? To speculate even more wildly, did the slaves' prophetic moon singers know that an early version of the Faceless Men were there, and deliberately seek them out? I'm not sold, but I'm throwing it out there for the sake of being thorough. The biggest strike against this theory is the kindly man's words. He says the Faceless Men took root in Valeria, which implies that they began there. A cloudy cloak, a magic mask. Hiding Braavos. Supposedly, the Sea Lord Utherozalni announced the existence and location of Braavos 111 years after its founding. The Braavosi call this event the unmasking or uncloaking of Braavos, and celebrate it every year with a masked ball. Maester Yandel tells us that before Braavos revealed itself, the Braavosi traded with Ib and the Seven Kingdoms, and practiced artful deceit when questioned about their home port. If we are to believe Maester Yandel's account of the Braavosi histories, Braavos' existence was kept a complete secret for 111 years. Could this have happened without magic? Sure, that's what Maester Yandel thinks. Glass candles versus sea fog. Yandel's status as an unreliable narrator aside, there are good reasons to question the official account. The history holds that the fogs hid the city, but we know from Arya's POV that although the fog and the mist are common in Braavos, fog is not ever present. During her time in Braavos, Arya describes both clear days and days cloaked in fog. So I'm not completely convinced that the city would stay hidden for 111 years, even if they were completely self-sufficient and there were no dragon lords looking for them. Now, if you're several steps ahead of me, you might be thinking of Greywater Watch as a counterargument. Greywater is a keep that even ravens cannot find, and the whole place seems to move. And I completely agree that Greywater Watch sets a precedent for nature acting as a hiding place. But it is possible that Greenseer magic helps hide Greywater Watch, and I plan to analyze its similarities with Braavos in the next essay in this series. So suspend your disbelief if you can. The first Braavosi supposedly escaped at the peak of Valyrian power, when the Dragon Lords had significant magical resources at their disposal. For example, Marwyn tells us that with one glass candle, the sorcerers of the Freehold could see across mountains, seas, and deserts. Surely, if the Valyrians had made any serious effort to find the disappeared slave ships, they could have found them among the other free cities, even if a little fog got in the way. Shire and Blood. The World Book gives us another reason to doubt the official, non-magical account. The Scouring of Lorth. Pull out your pocket map of the free cities. You have one of those, right? And you will see that Lorth is the closest of the free cities to Braavos. Assuming that the map of the free cities in the lands of ice and fire is reasonably close to scale, Lorth is slightly closer to Braavos than Dragonstone is to Storm's End. So why does this matter? During the Scouring of Lorth, the Valyrians supposedly rode hundreds of dragons on a mission to burn all the Lorthi Islands. The Dragon Lords brought fire and blood to Lorth to stamp out the ambitions of an Andal king, self-styled as Quarlan the Great. Quarlan's writ extended from the headwaters of the Upper Rhoyne in the south, all the way to the lagoon where Braavos would eventually rise in the north. Quarlan marched against Norvos, an ally of Valyria, and shrewdly, Norvos asked the Dragon Lords for aid. And the dragons answered the call, flying all the way from Valyria to the aid of Norvos, and then onward to put Lorth and all its people to the torch. As Maester Yandel put it, distances meant little and less to the Dragon Lords in the summer of their power. Indeed, Braavos was almost certainly founded sometime after the Scouring of Lorth. So on one hand, it is possible that the Valyrian torching of Lorth made Braavos uniquely remote. After all, the Valyrians had just burned everyone alive in the closest major city, and Lorth was supposedly abandoned for more than a century after the Scouring. A brief aside, the Scouring of Lorth is totally an homage to the Scouring of the Shire. Saruman and Wormtongue were totally Valyrians. It is known. But back to the topic at hand, the Scouring reads like an object lesson in Valyrian power. It demonstrates not only that the Dragon Lords could bring their wrath across continents, but that they did so throughout the free cities. If distances meant little and less to the Valyrians, and they could see through mountains with their glass candles, a little fog and a hiding place in a remote lagoon seemed like a pretty meager defense. The stink of sorcery. So I'm going to call bullshit on the official history and say that we at least consider a magical mechanism for the cloaking and uncloaking of Braavos. Maybe a fog did hide the city, but it was a persistent magic fog that befuddled even the glass candles. I'm not the first person to suggest the idea that sometimes mist or fog indicates the presence of magic. Shout out to Chloe of Girls Gone Canon. And there is a confirmed instance of magic mist in Essos. In Tyrion's POV at the Bridge of Dreams along the Rhine, we get a fog that is not natural and stinks of sorcery. It may or may not also cause some kind of time travel discrepancy. Although I don't think we have enough evidence to draw firm conclusions right now, we should be suspicious, and I will most certainly be examining the fogs of Braavos in the next essay. For now, let me observe that a lagoon surrounded by sea stone, bloodstone, or something similar, is an excellent hiding place. Bloodstone drinks the light, so it could contribute to cloaking the city in its darkness. And it also has magical properties that could not only enhance its ability to cloak, but also give magically inclined denizens a mechanism to evade thousands of watchful Valyrian eyes. A bloody covenant. If, like George R. Martin, your childhood involved many beautiful Sunday mornings spent inside at Sunday school, hearing that a group of escaped slaves led by a prophet founded Braavos probably made you recall the book of Exodus. That is the biblical story of Moses leading his people, the enslaved Israelites, out of Egypt into the Promised Land. This is the same story, of course, where God parts the Red Sea to allow his chosen people to escape, and then drowns the Egyptian army. In exchange for helping the Israelites escape slavery and find the Promised Land, God required that his people follow his laws. This is known as the Mosaic Covenant. So what does Moses tell us about the deal between the Braavosi and their moonsinger prophet? We know they didn't agree to follow the letter of the book of Leviticus. That would just be weird. Instead, I want to suggest that there was a deal, a covenant between the original Faceless Men, the worshippers of the god of death, and the escaped slaves who founded Braavos. Earlier, I posited that the bloody rebellion had the bloody hands of the Faceless Men all over it. So it is likely that the Moonsinger prophets and the Faceless Men worked together to found Braavos. I included the reference to Exodus here because I do think that George is paralleling the biblical story as his inspiration for Braavos, along with other parallel storylines like Nymeria's Exodus to Dorne, and the wildling Exodus south of the Wall. These stories also involve pacts or promises at the end of the journey, Nymeria's marriage, and the wildling's deal with the Night's Watch. I'm going to go ahead and quote the Wikipedia summary of biblical scholar Carol Meyer's commentary on Exodus. Exodus is arguably the most important book in the Bible, as it presents the defining features of Israel's identity. Memories of a past marked by hardship and escape, a binding covenant with God, who chooses Israel, and the establishment of a community and the guidelines for sustaining it. So, as we analyze the Faceless Men and Braavos, ask yourself this: what would a similar covenant look like if it were with the devil or the god of death? What would be the defining features of the Braavosi people's identity as they reconcile their memories of slavery and escape with the covenant that they made for a new life? A Braavosi always pays his debts. We get a lot of evidence that there is a special relationship between the Faceless Men and the people of Braavos. We get all of this from Arya's point of view, as we watch her journey to Braavos and eventually perform missions for the Faceless Men. First, we learn about the Braavosi equivalent of a secret handshake, the iconic Valar Morghulis, Valar Doharis call and response. When Jaqen gives Arya the iron coin of the Faceless Men, he connects the coin to the phrase Valar Morghulis. The words themselves are important. Indeed, they work like magic words for Arya. When Arya tries to book passage on a ship outbound from Salt Pans, the coin and the words work wonders. The captain turned it over and blinked at it, and then looked at her again. This? How? Jaqen said to say the words too. Arya crossed her arms against her chest. Valar Morghulis, she said, as loud as if she'd known what it meant. Valar Doharis, he replied, touching his brow with 2 fingers. Of course, you shall have a cabin. Arya goes from being denied passage and almost ignored to being afforded an almost religious reverence. She spoke the words and presented a coin to prove her affiliation with the Faceless Men. Once the Titan's daughter arrives in Braavos, a couple other things become clear. Not only does the captain know exactly where to take Salty, he wastes no time getting her off his ship. Arya notices how uncomfortable he seems to be with her presence. And when Tenyo drops her off at the temple, he makes sure that she knows his name. Given that Jaqen used whispered names as death sentences, and we later learn that Faceless Men do not assassinate people they know personally, this is not a coincidence. These Braavosi sailors not only know that Arya is a servant of death, but they also recognize that they owe death something. All men must serve. Death's won-over on the Braavosi is fleshed out in a couple of other interesting ways as well. First, Arya's relationship with Brusco, when she assumes the Cat of the Canal's identity, demonstrates widespread respect and service to the Faceless Men in Braavos. Not only does Brusco take her in under his own roof without question, he knows when Cat must return to the temple, when the moon is a black hole. Now, you could assume that Brusco is also a Faceless Man, but I think the better interpretation is that Brusco is just doing what any Braavosi would do. After all men must serve. Finally, many Braavosi, and admittedly others, seek the temple's black cup to die. People who drink from the black cup are not following whatever funeral rites would normally apply in their primary religions. Remember, all gods are worshipped by the Braavosi, but those who seek death at the House of Black and White are not laid to rest by the priests of the religion they follow in life. Instead, upon death their bodies are forfeit to the temple. We see Arya clean the dead and take them down into the sanctum. It seems implied that if they can, the people of Braavos are encouraged to come to the temple to die, and perhaps, in doing so, give up their faces. Death to slavers! So, what does this mean? The Braavosi must have agreed to serve the faceless god and give themselves up to the god of death in exchange for something. The best candidate is etched in stone on the archway that forms the legs of the Titan, the first law of Braavos, that no man should ever be a slave, a thrall, or a bondsman. The Braavosi agreed to serve the Faceless Men in exchange for the Order's help to end slavery. Given the wealth of Braavos, there is probably a bit more to it than just that simple promise. In the beginning, the Faceless Men may have promised to hide the city from the Dragon Lords, but eventually, Once the city unmasked itself, the Braavosi grew more ambitious. They sought out the wealth and power needed to end the Valyrian freehold. The secret city moved stealthily, under the veil of trade, and with the help of an order of assassins, forged in the red darkness of the 14 Flames. Many good theories connect the Faceless Men with the Iron Bank. A Nefarious investment is one of my favorites. It's linked in the show notes here. So I will not delve into the details of that connection. But a connection between the Iron Bank and the House of Black and White explains a heck of a lot. Importantly, it would connect the fabulous wealth of the Iron Bank with the high prices demanded by the Faceless Men for significant assassinations. It would also help explain the value of the information that the Faceless Men collect. The many-faced god's demands. So why did the Faceless Men want people to come to their temple to die? Sure, they want to collect their faces to use as disguises. But let's consider a deeper motivation. As I hinted at before, I think the answer lies in blood sacrifice, a common theme in the magic of A Song of Ice and Fire. The Faceless Men are getting something, or at least pretending to get something, in exchange for sacrificing blood to some magical artifact in the center of the sanctum. A piece of oily black stone, or meteor, perhaps? Shout out to LML and the Mythheads. So far, it fits the historical clues we have discussed. The presence of sea stone surrounding Braavos, a protective titan carved out of sea stone, a moonsinger magic prophecy guiding the escaped slaves to the right magical place. The weird abandoned iron mine and underground tunnel system. A magic powerful enough to not only hide the Braavosi from the Dragon Lords, but to make Braavos fantastically wealthy and give them the power to bring down the Valyrian freehold. But we are only just beginning. I know, I haven't convinced you yet. To prove what's going on under this hollow hill, under the green sea of Braavos, deep in the tunnels beneath the House of Black and White, we must look more closely at how the magic of the Faceless Men works. Only then can we return to solve the mysteries lurking deep in the dark stone sanctum of the House of Black and White.